The era of the PlayStation 2 and its contemporaries brought many titles that are nowadays considered classics and masterpieces. Games such as GTA San Andreas, Resident Evil 4, God of War, and the original Halo heavily affected the development of video games as a medium, and their impact is felt to this very day, to the point where all of these games have gotten either sequels or remakes, which makes them still relevant in today's industry. Paradoxically, however, the 6th generation of consoles is considered by many, including myself, to be the golden era of 3D platformers. I say paradoxically because of the fact that, although you could argue that many of these games can be viewed as the best of the genre, most of these series are, for some reason, not getting any new games. Chances are that if your favorite platformer from back in the day isn't some sort of mascot of Nintendo, Sony, or Microsoft, the IP has been dormant for probably more than a decade, which is the case of absolute powerhouses of the genre such as Ico, Sly Cooper, and Jak and Daxter. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the lack of sequels for a game should never cloud your judgment regarding the quality of said title. I mean, if PC is so great, why haven't they made PC too? Anyway, today we're talking about what, in my opinion, is one of the most ambitious and unique 3D platformers ever released. And no, I'm not talking about Super Mario Sunshine, Ratchet & Clank, or any of the titles that I've already mentioned. Today we're having a look at Vexx, released in 2002 for the PlayStation 2, original Xbox, and Nintendo GameCube, which, for reference, is the version that I'll be playing throughout the video. So, without further ado, let's dive into the wild world of Vexx and explore what it got right, where it stumbled, and whether you should give it a try in 2025. Let's start with the story, which is surprisingly dark. In the opening cutscene, Vexx's village suffers a brutal attack by the evil tyrant Dark Yabu and his minions, leaving our protagonist and his grandpa enslaved. After a series of unfortunate events, Yabu ends up killing Vargas, Vexx's grandpa and only family. Stricken by sorrow and vowing revenge, Vexx escapes after nightfall from the caves, finding the Astani warrior talents in the process, which painfully bind themselves to his flesh, causing our protagonist to faint. Pretty intense for a genre typically known for its upbeat mascots and vibrant worlds, if you ask me. After the first cutscene is over, we awaken a feverish dream that'll act as the tutorial for the game. Controls are pretty standard: left stick for movement, right stick controls the camera. The A button jumps, and the L button or left trigger makes you crouch. Jumping during a crouch will give you either a long jump or a high jump depending on whether you're moving or not at the time of crouching. Once we've learned how to jump, the game introduces us to its situational movement mechanics, such as swimming and climbing. Following this, as we now know how to move, the game introduces combat. Vexx has a variety of offensive moves, such as melee combos, an uppercut, a projectile ground slam, and an air kick. The tutorial doesn't teach you about this, but these do not account for Vexx's complete combat moveset. There are several other combos that Vexx can pull off besides the basic one, but we'll cover that later. To wrap up, the tutorial introduces you to the concept of Wraith Hearts, Soul Jars, and Shards. Wraith Hearts are the objects that allow progression through the game. Every world has several quests, each awarding one Wraith Heart, and unlocking each world has a minimum Wraith Heart requirement. They work very similarly to stars in Mario 64. In each of the worlds, there are 6 unique soul jars scattered throughout the level. If you find them all, you get an additional Wraith Heart. Finally, there's shards. These are small tokens that you can find aplenty everywhere you go. If you collect 100 of them in any world, you'll get another Wraith Heart. An important thing to mention is that every time that you collect a Wraith Heart or die, the amount of collected soul jars and shards will reset to 0. So if you want to familiarize yourself with where's what in each of the levels, collecting 100 shards can be an excellent choice for your first heart in each of the worlds. So, having finished the tutorial, we awaken Timberdale, the first of the many worlds in Vexx. A cutscene plays, introducing Darby, an old man who found Vexx after he collapsed during his encounter with the Talons and brought him to this chamber they were currently in. Darby explains that Yabu destroyed the village and everyone's gone, and that Dark Yabu intends to open a rift that connects the worlds, which would allow him to summon demons from the Wraith world to conquer and enslave all others. After telling us that we have to stop Yabu, Darby sends us on our way, but before we leave this chamber, there's an important item that we should collect first. By jumping on this pile of fire, we get launched into the air, which allows us to reach this section. Then we can interact with a portal here in order to enter the pictures that hang in the chamber, and jumping around from picture to picture, we unlock the rock suit. Once that's done, we get out of the chamber and Darby tells us to climb this mountain to claim our first heart, so we do. After slaying some basic enemies and riding this platform, we make this jump and climb up this ledge. Here's the game's first boss, but we decide to ignore him for the time being and jump over here. Climb up these stairs, and there we have it, our very first Wraith Heart. Now that we're in the main hub and we have to venture back into the Timberdale world, we're able to access our heart collection. At any point during the game, you can access your inventory from the pause menu or by pressing the right bumper. Here you can see which hearts you have acquired and which you're missing in each of the worlds you've already visited. In order to help you understand what you need to do in order to acquire a certain heart, the game will give you a short rhyme which will describe the mission and its objective. These can sometimes be pretty cryptic, but for the most part they do a pretty good job of pointing you in the right direction without holding your hand too much. Remember the rock suit that we just unlocked? Well, here's a chance to put it to good use. In order to get this next heart, we need to break it out of this frozen cage, but the ice is too hard for our talons to claw through it. So what we need to do is activate the suit in this platform and dash to the location of the heart before the timer runs out. An interesting thing in terms of level design is that given the fact that the suit is pretty heavy, we can barely jump while it's active, which results in that jumps that are easy in Vexx's base form are literally impossible while having the suit. This means that in order to make it in time for these sorts of hearts, you'll need to take a route which you normally wouldn't, especially given how Vexx's mobility incentivizes you to jump around all over the place. And just like that, we get our second heart. Having already gotten 2 hearts, I decide that it's time for our first boss battle, so we climb up the same mountain from the beginning, but this time with the intention of taking on Sumo. With the exception of the final boss, bosses in Vexx are more puzzle-based than centered around combat. The game's combat system, although varied, is not deep enough to sustain bosses centered around it, which is why the encounters against the vast majority of them resemble the ones that you can find in something like Soul Reaver instead of games like Devil May Cry or God of War. Being the first boss, the fight against Sumo is pretty simple. He's intangible from attacks from the front, but if you manage to hit him in his rear, you'll push him forward. Simply push him to the ledge to cause him to tumble, and hit him again while in this tumble animation to knock him out of the ring. First one to get knocked out 3 times, loses. So 1, 2, 3, and...
See you later, stinky!
On to the next one. In order to get this next heart, we need to make it to the side of the level, fight a couple of enemies, and climb a couple of walls, and we arrive at the top of this little cliff. From here, you'll see these massive moving stones. You need to jump from stone to stone to make it to the one floating at the very top. Normally, you'd take the intended route and land on every single stone, but with the fact that we know about a couple of unintended movement mechanics, we can skip from the second to the final stone and simply get the heart this way. Here's a brief explanation of these mechanics. Although this first one is not unintentional, you might have noticed that throughout the game I've been using the air kick while platforming. This is because although Vexx doesn't feature a double jump that you know of,
subtle foreshadowing.
The air kick gives you a bit of extra height and completely halts your falling momentum, which allows it to use it as a sort of double jump. To this, you can add the second mechanic that I wanted to discuss, which is that the game has a small buffer where you can still input a grounded action for the first couple of frames after becoming airborne. By itself, this mechanic is also completely intentional and is something very common in 3D platformers. Developers implement this so that when players try to jump off of a platform while running to the edge, you don't simply plummet to your death if you've missed the window by a couple of frames. You can abuse this mechanic by jumping first and then quickly inputting a crouch, which will result in Vexx starting their high jump or long jump a bit higher in the air than he normally would, giving you access to a slightly higher high jump and a slightly longer long jump. And for the last mechanic that I wanted to bring up, remember that
subtle foreshadowing
about a double jump just a second ago? Well, I lied. There's no double jump. There is, however, a triple jump. You might have noticed during the video that hitting enemies with any attacks fills up this meter on the upper right corner. Once the meter is full, you can activate Fury Mode by pressing the right trigger, which, after its initial activation, will make Vexx able to shoot blasts of energy out of his talons. Here's the kicker. For whatever reason, both of these actions put Vexx in a grounded state even if you perform them in the air. So if you put 2 and 2 together with the last mechanic that I mentioned, you already know what this means. You can jump into the air, activate Fury Mode, buffer a long jump or a high jump, fire a blast, and buffer another long jump or high jump, giving you a triple jump. Anyway, now that you know that, let's introduce another one of the game's mechanics. In every level, there's a sundial, a grounded clock that you can spin around to change the time of day. These sundials have a highlighted segment, a certain time of the day which, if you set the sundial to, will activate a sun gate that will take you to a platforming challenge, where if you complete it, you will acquire a Wraith Heart. Given that Timberdale is the first level and thus the game's opportunity to introduce this mechanic, the sun gate is placed right next to the sundial, but as you'll see going forward, they're usually quite far apart, meaning that you'll need to find both parts of the puzzle in order to get these hearts. After that, we end up getting our 6th heart, which is nothing out of the ordinary. We have to access this cave, in which you will find 3 towers and a portal. Inside each of the towers, there's a water-themed platforming section and a ring suspended in midair that you need to go through. Go through all 3 rings, and the Wraith Heart will appear near the portal, letting you obtain it. Now, in order to acquire all the hearts that we've got up to this point, we've done some pretty diverse quests. There have been puzzles, several sorts of platforming sections, and we've even fought a boss, so I wonder what's next. Oh boy.
Immens Messi, encara 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 Messi, gol, 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 gol,
Well, one thing's for sure, I bet that wasn't on your bingo list for this video. And now we get to the last Wraith Heart of Timberdale. I did get both the Soul Jar and Shards Hearts for every world, but I'll be leaving those out for the sake of brevity.
My brother in Christ, do you even know the meaning of that word?
Oh, shut up. Anyway, going back to the last heart, the mission's concept is pretty simple. We need to go through the portal that we found in the cave a couple of hearts ago. Inside the portal, there's a platforming level. You just need to climb to the very top and the heart is yours. The section is pretty long, so I'll take this opportunity to review the entirety of Timberdale. Timberdale as a whole feels like a very cohesive level. The world does an excellent job at introducing almost every single mechanic that the game has in an organic way, and it does so in a way that doesn't punish you too harshly for failing. The giant body of water at the base of the mountain where we found our first Wraith Heart means that even if you fall, most of the time you won't take damage or die, and you can get back up to where you were pretty quickly. To add to that, you can practice swimming around in that same body of water, where it's almost impossible for you to drown. Also, most of the level is pretty flat and has a bunch of simple enemies well scattered, so it inherently is a pretty good training grounds to familiarize yourself with how combat works. However, what I like most about Vexx's level design is how interconnected with themselves the levels feel. You have access to every single heart within a level from the get-go, so you can start wherever you want, and although the rhyme clues can be cryptic, you will very often find clues and routes to other hearts while you're out and about to get the Wraith Heart that you're currently after, which both encourages and rewards you for thoroughly exploring each world. And so we finally reach the top, collect the Wraith Heart, and move on to the second world, or that's what I would say if it wasn't for this next bit. You see, the game does something here that I really dislike. If you go back to the same tower where we obtained the last heart, there's this secret door that you can open by pressing this button. Going through the door will take you to an alternate, harder version of the same tower, and again, if you reach the very top, you can acquire another heart. However, as soon as you go through the door and the section loads, you'll see that this alternate version is located in Dragonreach, the second world, and so the heart is listed under Dragonreach in the inventory, even though there's no way to access it through that world, and the entrance to this section is in fact located in Timberdale. This is unbelievably stupid. And the reason why it frustrates me so much is not only that if you're missing this particular heart and don't know how to get it, you'll never find it by doing what the game tells you to do, which is exploring Dragonreach, but that the developers probably realized this at some point, given the fact that you'll see in the future there is at least one other heart that, while you technically collect in World B, you access the section of World B where you collected through World A, just like in this example. But in that case, the heart appears listed under World A, unlike what happens here. Criticisms aside, we reach the Wraith Heart at the top of the alternate tower, and having completed Timberdale, this time we do venture into Dragonreach.
I'm at the go.
Out of the gate, let me be completely honest. Thematically speaking, Dragonreach is absolutely one of the coolest and most badass levels that I've played in any game, let alone a 3D platformer. The entire level consists of an arid mountaintop where the colossal skeleton of an ancient dragon lies, and the designers did an amazing job to use every single piece of the skeleton either as a platform or a place to hide a secret in. A little digression here, but if you're a developer watching this video, I'm begging you, please recycle this concept. Having a level or a zone like this in a Souls-like or anything of the sort would be just incredible. Having said that, let's dive into the level itself, shall we? Our first Wraith Heart consists of the first minigame we'll come across in Vexx. There are several hearts like this throughout the game, and although each minigame has different mechanics, we'll always be competing against 3 shadow clones of ourselves. In this particular case, the goal is pretty simple. Standing on any platform on this 8x8 grid makes it start falling and awards us 1 point. Rounds last 30 seconds, and whoever has the least points by the end of each round gets eliminated. One thing that I'd like to address is the fact that, although simple, these minigames are quite enjoyable, and not having a multiplayer mode to replay this with friends feels like a bit of a waste of potential. I do understand that there aren't that many throughout the game, and thus a multiplayer mode could feel lackluster without additional content made specifically for it, but it's just a thought that crossed my mind while playing these. After getting the Wraith Heart for the Shadow Clones minigame, we venture into this underwater dungeon located near the entrance to Dragonreach to find a labyrinth puzzle. On the lower right corner of the screen, you can see a map of the maze. On it, there are these shiny cubes highlighted, which, if you avoid the sharks that lurk in the waters and pick them all up, will get you the heart. If you take a closer look at the aforementioned map, you'll notice that the labyrinth is actually split into 3 sections, and that's because there are 3 different entrances to the maze, so you'll need to repeat this process 3 times in order to obtain the Wraith Heart. Something noteworthy related to this last heart is how good the swimming mechanic actually feels. I know that the name a more iconic duo than gaming and bad underwater levels meme exists for a reason, but Vexx pulls off this mechanic quite well, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, at the end of the day it's not something super complex. I mean, you can't even attack while swimming, but the travel speed and the turn rate are very well adjusted so that moving underwater doesn't feel frustrating. And here comes one of my favorite bits of the video. Remember that triple jump mechanic? Here's a practical application of it. The intended way to get this Wraith Heart is to simply navigate the dungeon. From the starting room, there's 4 obstacle-filled corridors. Reaching the end of each one will allow you to cut one of the ropes suspending these platforms in the air, which will in turn allow you to make it up to the segment where the heart actually resides.
Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time. Ain't nobody got time. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Up next we have the return of the rock suit. Just like with the heart in Timberdale, we need to find both the platform to activate the suit as well as the Wraith Heart confined in the ice, which we spot while climbing this pole, so we just morph into the rock suit and make a dash for it. I don't exactly remember where it was, but with some tight movement we're able to recover, and there it goes. Moving on, the clue for the next heart reads, find a pulsing treasure on an ancient knuckle, take care in each measure, or it may just buckle. So we go out to see if we can find it in one of the dragon's knuckles. And wouldn't you know it, it's on the furthest one from the entrance to the level, so we platform through the spine to the upper regions and make it through the arm to reach the knuckle. Here you have to be quick about it since whenever you stand on the hand itself, it starts to tilt downwards, but it isn't specially complicated, so we add 1 to our heart collection. By the way, do you guys remember back when I introduced the existence of the rock suit at the beginning of the video? I then said that that was one of the 2 special forms that you can acquire throughout the game, so here's the second one. If you progress through the dragon spine and then activate this not-so-hidden teleporter, you'll be transported to this cliff, where you can find the token for the air suit. It behaves just like the rock one, meaning that you'll need to stand on an activation platform in order to slap it on, which will then grant you the power of flight for a short duration. Knowing that, we can head for the skull of the dragon, activate the suit, and glide through these rings to get the last heart of Dragonreach.
Flying free.
And so it is that with a total of 19 Wraith Hearts to our name, we leave the land of the dragon skeleton and we venture into the Neverglades. With a distinctive Mayan aesthetic, this world features a flooded lost city with several hidden rooms and secrets. The only criticism I have about the world's design from a mechanical perspective is that, although I love the theme of the level and its execution, the central region feels like it lacks a major piece, like how a chessboard feels void without a king. You would think that the pyramid that you see in the distance when entering the level would act as the aforementioned centerpiece, but given how it's positioned on the edge of the map, much like every other point of interest in this level, it just amplifies this feeling of emptiness instead of combating it. I do realize that it's a rather pedantic thing to complain about, but I really think that a slight change in the level's layout could have made the Neverglades much more interesting. Let's however stop my ranting here and have a look at our first quest, since it gives me an opportunity to bring up what the Neverglades does not only well, but remarkably well. Immediately after accessing the level, you'll find this cage with a Wraith Heart. In front of it, there are 3 headless statues. Bring the 3 heads back to the statues and the heart is yours. However, not only do you have to find the heads, while carrying one of these stones, your moveset becomes pretty limited. You lose access to both your long and high jumps, as well as any combat moves, including the air kick. Moreover, once you pick a head up, you have the ability to throw it, and once it lands, a countdown from 5 will start. If this countdown reaches 0, the head will immediately teleport back to the location where you found it, meaning that you not only have to find the missing statue parts, but you also have to plan how to get them where you need to. And this is exactly what I wanted to touch on. Along with its notorious Mayan aesthetic, the Neverglades carries this theme of mystery and wonder. And the developers of Vexx did an outstanding job when designing the level by not only focusing on the themes in a visual manner, but from the perspective of gameplay as well. Every single heart that you can obtain in the Neverglades requires you to solve a puzzle or discover some sort of secret, which makes the level's mechanics harmonize wonderfully with its visuals. After having placed all 3 heads and picking up the heart, we step back into the world and climb this wall behind the entrance. Here's this gate that, in order to open, we need to pick up 3 glyphs found nearby, so we head for this mazy section of platforms behind the gate, pick up all 3 glyphs, and the gate opens. Inside, we find this ancient structure buried in sand, with a Wraith Heart in the middle and another one suspended way up in the air. Initially, we just pick up the one in the center with some very basic platforming, and right after doing so, we come back into the same room in order to acquire the second one. In order to gain access to the second heart that you see suspended in midair, there are 3 buttons located near these statues on the side of the room. Once we press all 3, the center structure starts to unearth from under the sand, standing way taller than it originally did. This will in turn allow us to platform our way up to get the second heart, so we just do that, reach the very top, and the heart is ours. Next up is a pretty simple heart. All we need to do is access the section near the center of the map. Once we do, we see an underwater platform, and near it, this shiny gold ring. If we want to raise the platform, all we need to do is find the 3 electric eels swimming around in this pond and lure them near the ring. Once the ring conducts the electricity from the eels for enough time, the platform will emerge from the water and we'll be able to press this button, adding another Wraith Heart to our collection. And here's the only time where the game mechanically acknowledged the existence of Fury Mode during my playthrough. This next heart requires us to shoot a blast inside the burning mouth of this huge statue. As fun as that might initially sound, I'm starting to see a pattern in all of the challenges of the Neverglades, with the exception of the one where we needed to raise the structure from under the sand. For as much as I enjoy the theme and atmosphere of the Neverglades, all its quests have had a noticeable lack of complexity, which ultimately ends up making the Neverglades an aesthetically interesting level, but a mechanically boring one. Here, take a look at this next Wraith Heart. While previously we needed to fly through some rings that would speed us up in order to make it to an initially unreachable area, here we simply need to activate the airsuit to pick up the clearly visible heart suspended in midair. Not everything is dull though. I really enjoyed the final heart within the world, which is another one of the Inner Demons minigames. In this one, we and pick up these rings before our clones pick them up. And just like in a Sonic game, getting hit makes us drop rings, but the same is true for our opponents, which is a nice way to implement combat in these movement-centric minigames. The rules are pretty much the same as in the last one. There's 3 rounds of 30 seconds each, and the player with the least points at the end of each round is eliminated. After defeating our inner demons in this minigame, we pick up our 26th heart and we get a cutscene?
You.
Last of the cursed Astani. So proud, so regal, so foolish.
You'll never rule Astara.
We don't want to rule it. We intend to devour it. Every life that thrives here will succumb to the Shadow Wraiths. You will bear witness to our triumph. Thank you, boy. You've made all of this possible.
So it turns out that Darby was Dark Yabu all along, and he was using Vexx to power up the rift in order to obtain Rhea's staff, which would in turn allow him and his race to devour all the worlds that the rift connects, which makes Rhea send us after him, setting up the final boss of the game. Well, in order to be able to face Dark Yabu, we're gonna need to up our heart count to 60, so let's not waste any more time and get to the next world of Tempest Peak Manor. The concept of this level is pretty simple, but very original nonetheless. Tempest Peak Manor is the lair of a giant, but far from what you'd picture, the setting is pretty much an oversized contemporary living room. The dude even has a giant TV and console. But how's the level's gameplay? Well, to find out, let's just dive into our first Wraith Heart, shall we? Right after entering the level for the first time, we are introduced to what you could call this level's signature mechanic, Rex, the good boy. While most of the time he minds his own business and roams the level without bothering you too much, if at any point you fall down to the floor, he'll rush to you, having identified you as his potential dinner. If you'd rather avoid being a meal, you can dash for any of these air vents, which will propel you outside of his reach. Now that we know that, we head for this platform on the left, which turns out to be a giant TV set. Near the TV, we see a console, so being absolute gamers, we turn it on. But that does absolutely nothing, cause wouldn't you know it, the TV is off. So we jump to the couch, push the button on the remote, and there we have it. Given the controller's massive size, if we want to play this version of Arkanoid that we now have on screen, we've got to literally jump on the joystick in order to control the game. Once we do, the game starts. You have 3 attempts to break every brick on screen, with the heart itself acting like a ball. It doesn't take us too long, and once we do, the heart comes out of the screen for us to collect. Next up we have a pretty simple quest. This heart is trapped in a box, so in order to acquire it, we just have to find the box and break it open. One thing that I wanted to comment on is that I did some digging, and according to the Vexx wiki, designer Kynan Pearson said that Tempest Manor was the first level shown to video game journalists, and it definitely shows. The amount of attention to detail that was placed when designing this map can easily be seen when traversing through it. Small things like how the books are organically aligned in a messy manner, or the arrangement of the table really sell you on the idea that this is actually somebody's home, especially because of the way in which elements of the level synergistically play off each other. While we traverse the level, we start hearing a heartbeat, so we know that it's somewhere near this bookcase, and look, a green box. We smash the lid off, enter, and there it lays, trapped no more. Up next we get the memo that there's a heart inside the giant piano, so we head up there and throw ourselves inside. Once there we are presented with an instrument-inspired platforming level. The goal is pretty simple, we just have to conquer its platforming challenge in order to get our heart. There's a minor detail here that I really dislike, and it's nothing related to the setting or the mechanics of the level themselves because actually this heart is pretty fun. What I do have an issue with is the disgusting background that populates this section. I do get that it's trying to go for a darkish abstract theme, but I feel like something less blurry and jittery would have worked much better. That being said, we proceed through the platforms and reach the Wraith Heart waiting for us on this drum without much issue.
Easy money!
Following this one, there's another one of these level within a level hearts, but this time we have to venture into the old clock. Inside we find another platforming section, but this time filled with wooden floors and walls, a bunch of clock gears, and some spider webs. Although pretty simple in concept and execution, the time-gated platforming mechanics that are presented here do a great job of representing the theme that you're actually navigating the insides of a clock. Once we complete the level, we exit the clock and find ourselves on top of it, with a Wraith Heart waiting for us here. Once we complete the level, we exit the clock and find ourselves on top of it, with a Wraith Heart waiting for us here. Also, fun fact, you can entirely skip this section by using a triple jump from this picture on the left of the clock, and with some precise platforming, reach the heart this way.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the return of the demon minigame.
Now, as positive as I've been about these till now, this is literally a reskin version of the one that we found in the Neverglades, and as much as I like these, it feels really cheap to be presented with a recycled version of the minigame that we just played a level ago. The mechanics are exactly the same. The player with the least rings at the end of the round is eliminated, and taking damage makes you drop rings, so it's a mixture of movement and combat. We easily beat the 3 rounds and get the heart, no complications here. Following this, in order to get the last heart for this 4th world, we'll need to find the sundial gate, but before we do that, we head back to the piano near the entrance of the level in order to set the hour to the correct time frame. Once that's done, we spend about 20 minutes trying to find the gate itself, which can be literally anywhere within the level. I actually ended up getting the Shard's Heart while I was looking for the gate, but after some time I found it inside the clock. We venture inside and find another Shadow Realm platforming section. I honestly find these to be some of the best platforming that the game has to offer, not only due to the difficulty of the bunch, but also due to the fact that they seem to be designed in such a way that, although they are linear, they offer several ways to progress through them, having small sequence breaks that you can perform, some of them even without the need to use any of the unintended platforming mechanics that I've discussed during the video, for example here. After this, we miserably fail at trying to perform a triple jump, kill a couple of enemies, and jump around to reach the top of the level and get the final heart for Tempest Manor, meaning it's time to move on to world number 5, the Bellow. The Bellow is a level that takes place in a water-filled dome. It is quite small if you compare its size with any of the other worlds, but this is due to how the level is organized. Inside this dome, there are several towers which you can enter, each containing at least 1 Wraith Heart along with its challenge. You can also access small sections outside the dome itself on foot, which hide the world's soul jars. I have a hard time when it comes to criticizing the Bellow. On one hand, I love the setting and visuals of the level, and the individual hearts are quite varied and engaging, and if we view it from a gameplay-only perspective, I'd say it's probably the best world from the ones that we've been to up to this point, but the fact that each heart is its own sort of island really messes with the core of Vexx's level design. Up until this point, every world has had this interconnected design where elements of each heart quest pointed to each other, which meant that although you're doing singular missions for each of these hearts, the design makes you feel like you're exploring the world in its full, while the design of the Bellow makes it so that every heart feels detached from the world itself. It is true that the recurring pirate characters sort of alleviate this, but I feel like it's too little, too thin. Regardless of that, let's have a look at how the bellow plays on a moment-to-moment basis. We head inside the dome to venture into the first tower, and we find the simple-looking section, but as soon as we step into this button, the entire screen flips. The quest itself is pretty simple. All we need to do is stand on each of these inverted platforms to deactivate the shield that traps the Wraith Heart. Once we do, we just need to step up to grab it and find ourselves a Heart Richer. Following that, we have a peculiar heart. Before diving into the mechanics of the quest itself, a bit of an editor's note here. For whatever reason, the original footage of this particular heart got corrupted and I had to replay the heart after finishing the game, which is why some details such as my life and heart amount break continuity here. When it comes to the heart itself, we head for the second tower and inside we find a field of statues. Initially it may seem that all of them have the same pose, but there's actually a pair of statues striking a different one. Once you find them and activate them, they'll start pointing towards the center of the map and two other statues will strike a different pose. Find and connect all pairs to receive a heart. Pretty basic in theory, but there's a couple mechanics such as the dropping of this block that give the quest some complexity. In order to unlock this statue's button, we need to insert this block in that hole, but if we simply drop it onto this column, we won't have a way to push it off of it and into the slot, so what we have to do is align these columns into this makeshift platform in order to have room to push the block in. After this one, the rest of the statue pairs involve some basic platforming, so we'll skip ahead to the next tower. Oh no, not this hard. So, another editor's note, I've had to cut the footage of this heart to just the attempt where I got it because I don't want the video to last an hour longer than it had to. This quest is literally the only point during my entire playthrough where not only have I been frustrated with the game itself, but where I'm able to say that the zone is objectively very poorly designed. I'm not even going to go into the camera issues themselves, since that's basically opening a whole technical can of worms and I'd rather just say bad camera and move on. What I'm more interested in is how the level plays out. In order to get this Wraith Heart, we need to reach the pinnacle of this section and deactivate the ray. Until there, everything's Gucci. My problem resides within the level's layout itself. Let me explain. There are of course exceptions to this, but most problems presented to the player in video games present a challenge in two specters: strategy and execution. These are sort of self-explanatory, but for the sake of clarity, I'll define what I mean with each of these terms. Strategy would be the creative process of thinking of a solution to the problem or problems that the game presents you with, while execution would be the physical inputs that the player gives the game in order to attempt to conquer the challenge. Now that we've established that, here's the issue that I have with the level. It's riddled with invisible walls and ceilings which completely limit the range of possible creative solutions to the problems that the level presents, meaning that there's exactly one correct answer to each of the challenges that these platforms offer, which in turn means that the only possible depth this section can have is in the execution. But again, this is made incredibly frustrating by the camera angle issues that I just mentioned. One thing that I would want to touch on though is that having a single correct solution for a problem is not necessarily a flaw. Puzzles, for example, usually have a single possible solution, but by making it cryptic, it still gives the player the opportunity to go through the creative process of strategy development. Also, although I've said that most problems in video games present a challenge in both of these specters, it isn't always the case. A turn-based game will present no execution challenge, while performing a combo in a fighting game is a purely executional problem. So, why have I gone on this long tangent? It's because I want to make it clear that the reason why I'm criticizing this Heart's quest isn't only the camera issues or the difficulty spike that it represents, but the design itself. After reaching the top of the platforms and obtaining the Wraith Heart, it's time for the next one, and wouldn't you know it, we have another fight against Sumo. The mechanics of the fight are pretty similar to the first one. We have to push him out 4 times to win, but this time, the arena shrinks every time you successfully push Sumo out. And given that the arena is suspended in midair, if you fall off even once, you'll simply fall to your death and have to restart the fight from the beginning, which is surprisingly easy to do since the water on the platform will constantly push you outwards. You might think that this is a recycled fight, but given how Sumo has a vastly extended moveset and how much more challenging the fight is, it seems to me that this was the original fight against Sumo, and that later in development the devs adapted this one to a beginner-friendly version and placed it on the first level, not the other way around. So we defeat Sumo, but before we move on to the next Wraith Heart, check out... Anyway, we return to the bellow and find this hole near the bottom of the dome, so we go inside and find a volcanic level, filled with pits of lava and jumping fireballs. There are actually 2 hearts that we can find here, so we'll tackle them one at a time. After advancing through the segment for a bit, we find this flying ship, which we can enter from the top. Once in, we find these 3 pirates along with this chest tile board, in which, as you see, if any object makes contact with a square, it'll switch colors. We have 25 seconds to turn all squares to a single color, but the cannonballs being shot from the sides don't make it easy. If we happen to run out of time, a giant press will descend from the top, and if we're standing on the board, it'll take one of our lives. Or not, hee lamau. All in all, pretty cool minigame. Venturing back into the same segment, we can acquire a second heart by reaching the very top. There's a bunch of platforming and combat in this section, and it doesn't have any of the issues that the water level had, so it's pretty fun. We simply reach the top and grab the plummeting fall to the bottom of the level, after which we platform our way back up, kill a bunch of enemies, and this time don't miss the jump, acquiring the Wraith Heart. And now, a real blast from the past. Inside the Bellows underwater dome, you might have seen a giant whale-like creature. If you approach it at any point, it'll swallow you whole. No, not again, we already made that joke. Once inside, the whale— oh, come on! Who the fuck writes this script? Anyway, here we find a small boat with the 3 pirates from before, who have a chest containing, unbeknownst to them, a heart, but they claim that they don't know the passcode. Wanna know the way to figure out the passcode? Well, here's why I said that this was a blast from the past. You find it on the game's manual. That manual, the one that came inside the game's box 20 years ago. And there's no way to find this information in the game itself, so if you decide to play Vexx, the code is AXB on GameCube or X circle square on PlayStation. You're welcome. Following this, for the final quest of this world, we have another sundial gate, so we head through this path on the right of the level's entrance to find the sundial, set the correct time, and head back to the tower with the inverted platforms. At the back of the chamber, we have a small room that initially appears empty, but there's a sneaky platform here on top of the entrance that allows us to reach the upper portion of the chamber, and if we advance through it, we'll reach the sundial gate. Inside we find a peculiar level. Normally these sections are platforming challenges, and although you could categorize this as one, it resembles an obstacle course much more than it does a platforming section. I initially tried to dash under this huge thing, instantly transforming into Paper Vexx. What you actually need to do is activate this obstacle, avoid getting crushed like a dum-dum, ergo me, and dash under it while it's still climbing up. After that, we're faced with some more crushing obstacles that we need to simply dash through, and we reach the Flappy Bird beta from 10 years before it got popular, followed by a couple of combat encounters and the spinning tower, at the top of which awaits an obstacle like the first one. We simply have to dash through it again, conquering the last quest from the Bellow. I actually really enjoy the Bellow. Even if I'm not the biggest fan of its overarching design as I previously explained, I can confidently say that, if we ignore the water tower, the moment-to-moment gameplay is pretty varied and engaging, and the quests are starting to get increasingly challenging without necessarily feeling frustrating, which, to the game's credit, is something that a lot of platformers struggle to do. And thus, with a Wraith Heart count of 47, we venture into the next realm, Daggercrag. Given the arid scenery, you'd think that it resembles Dragonreach, the second world, a bit too much, but given that the setting is a mystical floating island, it allows the level to have its own identity, making it feel different enough to Dragonreach even if they share a similar aesthetic. The quests themselves also set the levels apart. While the missions in Dragonreach were mainly focused on exploration, we can see that Daggercrag is a much more hostile world, with several hearts being either completely focused on combat, or due to the enemy placement and variety, heavily integrating combat into their structure. Take a look at this example here with our first heart. The quest is pretty simple. Reach the topmost section of the map, where there's a crystal dome that we can shatter with a ground blast, and the heart is ours. But in order to get here, we've not only had to platform through the entire map, which is pretty treacherous, might I add, but also have several combat encounters with a diverse set of enemies, which is what I mean when I say that even if the quest itself is not focused on combat, the level design itself makes it so that combat is integrated into most quests naturally. Moving on to our next heart, we're gonna need to reach this tower and climb it from the inside, but given that it has collapsed, we need to find a way to extend it before we do so. By finding 3 buttons scattered throughout the map and pressing them, we can restore the building to its former glory, making these platforms appear so that we gain access to it. Once we do, there's some basic platforming inside the tower, and that gives us our second heart. I feel like this quest is the most simplistic and less unique of the bunch that Daggercrag has to offer, and it barely enriches the level, so we'll simply move on to the next one. While climbing the floating island for our first heart, I noticed a chamber that opened near the middle point, so let's venture there and see what it has to offer. And to be frank, this genuinely surprised me. Inside we find a monk of some sort in a room riddled with enemies, and in order to get the Wraith Heart we need to beat a time attack. Kill all the enemies before the timer runs out. It's not very hard to do once you find a semi-decent route, but I failed the first time that I attempted it, so it's not too easy either. If you're having difficulties with this section, using the ground blast with groups of enemies helps a bunch given its massive hitbox, so give that a try. And next up we have a boss fight, but don't worry, this time it's not sumo. We reach this remote part of the level, which has the somewhat glitchy, might I add, door to the arena. Within lays the mummy of Abraxas, and the fight is pretty tough. Not only is the area where you fight relatively small, making Abraxas attacks hard to dodge, but some of their attacks send you flying, and if you're unlucky enough to be close to the ledge, well... In order to defeat Abraxas, we need to dodge their attacks for a prolonged period of time, after which they'll become dizzy and we can bonk them in the head. Do this 3 times like in the good old days, and the boss is done, rewarding us with a Wraith Heart for our trouble. With only 3 hearts remaining, we're closing into the end of the level, and much to our delight, 2 of them are in the same section, so let's head there. If you reach the floating island near the entrance of the world and you decide to go downwards instead of up, you'll reach this door. Inside there's another arena, something much more common in games like Devil May Cry or God of War than a platformer, but hey, that's Vexx for you. Floating in the air, there's our next Wraith Heart, and in order to reach it, we have to use this huge platform, but it has a weight limit, and we'll only start going upwards provided that the weight on it isn't over the threshold, so cue the Devil May Cry music?
Nice.
While clearing this previous heart, I noticed that at the top of one of the walls in the room was the level sundial gate, so after setting up the sundial, let's dive into it and get the second to last heart for the world. Inside the Shadow World, we find a classic platforming section with some poles to climb and several moving platforms to jump through. There's also a couple of enemies, but nothing out of the ordinary. Honestly, this heart isn't too challenging, and it might have been better suited for one of the earlier levels, but it doesn't necessarily stick out for its difficulty. Moving on to the last Wraith Heart for Daggercrag, we have something quite unique. By jumping down this hole, we enter this chamber filled with destructible blocks. Your mission is to break whichever ones you need in order to create a path that allows you to reach the heart at the top of the puzzle. Pretty interesting in theory, but it has one glaring issue. Yep, your kick has such a massive hitbox that precisely breaking the blocks that you want becomes quite frustrating very quickly. On the flip side, the blocks only become partially destroyed, and if there isn't another block over the one in question, you can still stand on its remains, which somewhat mitigates the issue that the puzzle has. One workaround that could have been implemented would be for an attack to be unable to break more than one block at a time, but I don't know how realistic this would have been, given the fact that you would also need to implement some sort of priority system in order for the game to be able to decide which block the player breaks, and if implemented wrong, it could either make the puzzle too telegraphed if, for example, blocks that the player was supposed to break had priority, or it could make the puzzle even more frustrating if some sort of proximity system was implemented, making higher blocks require an even more precise input. Having said that though, although it has flaws, I do like the puzzle. It focuses on mobility, which is the game's strongest suit, and it has several possible solutions, allowing for creativity, which is one of the main criticisms that I had for the water tower in the previous world. Having completed Daggercrag with a total of 55 hearts, we speed into the final realm for this video, the Summit of the Sages. If by any chance it looks familiar, it's because we technically have already been here. Back when we slid down the drain in Tempest Manor to get the Wraith Heart in the sink, the end of the pipe landed us in that cage over there. The level overall features some pretty varied settings and locations, which you'll see as we progress through the quest, but in contrast to the Bellow, the level feels much more interconnected and organic. Even if the locations are so different from each other, the world's structure gives the entire thing a much more cohesive impression, which in turn makes the world interesting, encouraging the player to explore it. Compare the footage of the first Wraith Heart to the second one. Even if the industrial ambientation of the first quest is so different to this one, if you think about it, both are platform sections with obstacles that try to push you off the edge and some enemies sparkled in somewhere. They're actually pretty similar. What makes both of them work in a single level is that the quest for these two Wraith Hearts are not just the platforming sections, but the exploration moment that preludes them. You see a giant rock head and want to know what's inside it, you see the rings in the water and want to know what happens if you activate them. This is why, even though I believe that the individual quests in the Bellow are better, I also believe that the Summit of the Sages is a better level overall. Having gotten our first 2 hearts from the aforementioned missions, and the third one from a recycled demon minigame that I'll proceed to yeet out of this video due to pacing, we find that our 4th heart will also come from a platforming section, but this one is different. You know, it's not like the other platforming sections. What we need to do here is activate several switches scattered throughout this section, which will increasingly raise the water level, gradually giving us access to the entirety of the room, ultimately letting us completely submerge it, so that we can reach the Wraith Heart waiting for us at the very top. Funnily enough, this is one of the only quests in the entire game that I've seen combine on-foot and underwater traversal, along with the one in the Timberdale portals, which is why I mentioned that it deserves some credit for being somewhat unique. Now, I want to give my general thoughts on the game up until this point rather than simply narrate the footage for the last heart. Vexx's movement and combat mechanics are very solid, and are, without a shadow of a doubt, the main reason why the game is fun to play, even if it can feel shallow or repetitive at certain points. The reason why I say this last bit is that it is, in my eyes, Vexx's biggest flaw, and it is the fact that these mechanics do not evolve during the playthrough. The same mechanics that are introduced during the tutorial are the ones that you'll be interacting with on your 8th or 12th hour of gameplay. You could argue that there's the power suits, but I won't blame you if you've forgotten about their existence by now, given their very limited amount of appearances and applications throughout the game. I'd love to have a conversation with the devs, given that the game feels like it was rushed, and I'd want to know what they originally envisioned while creating this forgotten, flawed gem of a game. But hey, we have a big bad evil guy to take down in the form of Dark Yabu, so let's face him and end this once and for all. After coming out of the portal, we are directly met with the arena where Yabu is waiting, a short cutscene plays, and we're thrown right into the boss fight, which consists of 3 phases. In the first one, Yabu will initially summon 3 waves of these demon reptiles. The easiest and most consistent way that I've found to defeat them is to time an uppercut when they tackle you and ground blast them over and over again. After you defeat these 3 waves, Yabu will start casting fireballs from the sky, and after sending a couple of volleys your way, he will summon 3 more waves for you to deal with, although this time you'll have to also deal with the raining fireballs. Once you deal with the minions, Dark Yabu will transform into this spider form, starting the second phase of the fight. Here you basically need to smack my minions off! Here's how you do it. After dodging his attacks for a while, he will try to snatch you with his hands, and if he misses, he'll be vulnerable for a second, which you can capitalize on by hitting him in the face, which will in turn make him dizzy, allowing you to uppercut his torso to flip him around, which will then allow you to hit him in the family gems with a ground blast to finally damage him. Repeat this process 5 times and you're done with this phase. Believe me, it's easier said than done. But when you finally succeed, you'll enter the third and final phase, which honestly is the easiest of the 3. After summoning a single wave of minions, Yabu will start shooting fireballs at you, which you can now parry apparently. Every time you deflect one back at him, he'll take some damage and a part of the arena will break. Repeat this process enough times and the arena will completely break, and you will have defeated Dark Yabu, leaving you with a final cutscene for Vexx, which hints at a sequel that unfortunately never happened. I'll just let you enjoy it.
We should have known at the time. I guess we all make mistakes. Perhaps the only thing worse than failing is the fear of failing. Ultimately, we've set things right. Fortunately, there are those who continue to do so.
And that's it, we made it to the end of the game. Vexx's main differential from other titles in its genre is its darker theme and ambientation, which bleeds into the game's visuals as well. Unlike many platformers of the era, which leaned heavily into lighthearted, family-friendly vibes, Vexx features moody, twisted environments and somber tones. This definitely set it apart, but how did it impact Vexx's overall appeal? On one hand, it's refreshing to see a game in this genre take a risk with a darker aesthetic. But at the same time, it raises the question, who exactly was Vexx for? The tone could be a little too intense for younger players and maybe a bit off-putting for fans of more lighthearted platformers. Ultimately, in my opinion, the setting created an odd niche for Vexx that likely limited its audience appeal. At the end of the day, however, Vexx is a game that not only would not be made in this day and age, but it's also a great representation of its era, back when games were made in a much more experimental and explorative manner. It is not a masterpiece, and if you haven't played the titles of the genre that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you should play those first. All of them are objectively better games, and I don't think that anyone is going to discuss that. But Vexx has something that draws me to it, and if it attracts you as well, you should definitely give it a try. I've intentionally played it by getting every possible heart in all of the levels that I've shown in this video, in order to show the least amount of worlds necessary to beat the game, so that if you decide to play it, you can still experience some of the later worlds completely fresh. So, that would be all from me. Thank you very much for watching, and listen, this video took a lot of time and effort to put together, but I'm so satisfied with the end product. So if you watched me for my Remnant 2 content, thank you, but moving forward I'll be focusing on long-form videos such as this one. Leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe if you enjoyed our time together, but above any of these things, please, go and give Vexx a try.